Welcome to Kings of War Wednesday. This week we're starting a little bit of a series here where we're looking at specific unit types and how to deal with them when you are lining up against them on the other side of the table. So this week it's flying individuals, which of course share certain attributes with just regular flying units and big flying monsters, but there are also some differences as well. So often they'll be fast, they can get where they want to go. Individuals typically are going to be able to do that more readily with the extra pivots involved in being an individual. They're also a bit more forgiving in the positioning sense, so if you leave them facing away from the enemy, then they can still provide a bigger threat than some of the other flying units. For example, a large flying monster, that really has to be looking where it wants to go in the next turn in advance. Individuals don't have to worry about any of that. With the individuals, of course, you're not going to be getting extra attacks for any of those juicy flank charges that you're bound to find yourself looking for. But charging into the flank with an individual, when the rest of your units are attacking the front, does give you the little bonus of not being a potential target for an overrun. So we're going to look at some of the fundamentals of what you're likely to see when you face a flying individual first. And the one I'm going to be focusing on mostly is Basusu, or Susan, in my Abyssal Dwarf army, because that's the one I've got the most experience with. We've got Basusu here, occupying a typical fly position right out on the flank, because why not? I've taken some pictures from my various games, mostly from tournaments. Some of these are from the last edition of Kings of War, but the issues I'm going to be discussing here are still very relevant. So you can see Susan lining up behind a unit there, approaching the enemy, and there is a horde of archers there, and what's immediately noticeable is that there is nothing guarding them really. So what is the consequence for the flying individual attacking that unit? A horde of archers, they're going to have a lot of attacks, so certain flying individuals wouldn't like that. Susan though has got high nerve and good defense and regeneration, so if she gets stuck in a bit of a war of attrition against a horde, it's not that big of an issue. And because she's individual, of course, it doesn't matter that she's facing the back of the battlefield, she can just spin round. As you can see, when she does eventually make it into that unit, she starts kicking their butts, and as the battle goes on, she can always just, being an individual, turn round and run away and charge something else. But a lesser flying individual would most likely want to be looking for softer targets than this, for example, a war machine, or a small chaff unit, something they've actually got a chance against. Susan's a bit on the expensive side for chasing after war machines, and a big horde like this, something that was threatening other units in the army as they advance, might be a good use because it is a bit of a staging post for her as well. As I was saying, she doesn't have to be fighting them for the whole game. She's likely to survive the countercharge from a horde of archers, unless they have particularly spicy combat ability. So you're going to be free to then attack the back of the enemy line if they're moving forward, or the flank if they just stay where they are. We've got another situation here, clearly against some lovely Trident realms. Susan is up in a pretty safe position there, staying out of the arc of charge of anything that's in any way a threat, and then she's going to help out when it comes time for combat. So this is the kind of thing I would mostly use Susan for. She's expensive, she's good at fighting, so you want her to be fighting, otherwise you're just wasting the points. Sending Susan into a flank while something else goes into the front. Very worthy use of her talents. Another juicy target I always look out for, cavalry. Maybe not the hardest hitting cavalry units, but anything that relies on thunderous charge. You're going to be faster than them. Susan getting in there first, taking away some of that juicy thunderous charge. So we're talking medium cavalry, so orc cavalry probably fit into this bracket. Anything that isn't going to slaughter her immediately on the countercharge regardless of losing some thunderous. So units like this, anything with the cavalry sort of nerve, or nerve of, say, an ogre horde, units you're going to see a lot. Susan is actually surprisingly good at dealing with those kinds of units. She's probably not going to kill them in one go, but especially if they have thunderous charge to remove, chances are they're not going to take her out in the next round. And then with 2 rounds of attacks, she can actually get them pretty close to death. On occasion, Susan has taken out some large chariot units in the past. So we're going to look at some potential counters now, and this is against a very interesting Shrek ogre army. You can see there's a bit of a flank attack going on here. There's gargoyles and there's also Susan. And the enemy have turned around quite a few units to counter them. So one thing I really like about flying individuals typically, it can vary depending which armies are involved in the game, but for the most part, to deny them the ability to do what they want to do, or to counter them effectively, you have to spend more points than they cost. You can see here that a couple of the ogre heroes end up sitting back there, kind of babysitting the other units, just in case Susan decides to charge them. So if you can force the enemy to babysit their units and stay further back in the fight, and not be up there helping the rest of their troops, it doesn't take long to work out how many points the enemy is using to counter a threat that you're posing to them. Here's another example of a potential counter. When you see a Susan approaching, first of all, other fast, fighty individuals, obviously, that's a bit of a counter, and the units that are presented here, there's nothing that's a really juicy target there. If Susan charges the individual, it's going to be hindered, probably not going to kill it, and then will be charged by all those other units. If Susan charges the Tortured Souls, then both of those other units will be able to countercharge her, even if she kills them. And if she charges into the Molochs, unlikely to kill them in a round, and they'll be able to countercharge, be pretty potent, and also that flying individual can just spin round and charge her in the rear as well. So on this occasion, Susan flew away, but that did leave those 3 units miles away from the action for a while. So I felt that was a worthy use of her talents. Here's an example of something I've run that is something you might consider as a counter to anything flying that's going to be trying to land among your lines. Multiple cheap units that can actually threaten those units. So war trombones can just spin around, blast anything that lands nearby. If there's 3 of them, a flying individual, if it wants to attack one of them, it's cheap, it's not really a good use of their time, and there's still 2 there that are going to shoot it. So on this occasion, those 3 war trombones would cost less than Susan. So it's probably not worth her time trying to chase after them if they're bunched together like that. She's best off looking for a different target, I think, unless it's part of a coordinated attack. But there are other things you don't want to mess with as well. Certain units you don't want to be landing close to. Any kind of fighty individual, anything that's maybe got duelist, you don't want to be landing near to them. So you can block off certain areas of your army, certain areas of the table, as viable places for Susan to land. I put the word out that I was going to be doing this video, and a couple of questions came in on my Facebook group. So this is from Mode, and this is, which are the best flying individuals? Well, I'm sure I haven't actually faced all of them. I would obviously consider Susan to be upper tier, but she has lost Vicious in this edition, which is a little bit of a setback when pretty much everything else in the army of Abyssal Dwarves does have Vicious, so that's not nice. The flying individuals that I would worry about the most when facing on the battlefield would be any kind of flying dwarf, I think. So a flying dwarf Berserker Lord, for instance, is pretty scary, and the reason for that is it's in the same bracket as Susan in that it's got enough attacks that it can actually do some damage when it charges something. It doesn't have to be limited to war machine hunting, and that one specifically, because it's a Berserker, I'm pretty sure it can't be wavered. And often the things that you want to be hassling flyers behind your lines are things that are more likely to waver them. They usually inspire themselves, flying individuals, so wavering them is a handy way of grounding them without having to roll to kill them twice. So flying Berserker Lord, usually quite a scary one. Tricks and tips to avoid being charged by flying individuals, especially for individuals like wizards, he also says. So I would say, if you're a wizard and you don't want to get charged by a flying individual, make sure that the consequences for your wizard being charged are high. If you can do that without purely babysitting, then that is probably the best way. If you're dedicating units entirely to defend other units, then that means they're not taking a really big part in the game and you're letting the enemy flyer dictate what you do. So if you have a role for a unit that also allows it to guard your wizard, then that's probably the best way to go. Also, keeping versatile units around, things that can turn round and shoot without any kind of penalty, or things that can spin round and charge like your own individuals. If it's a flying infantry model, then it's not that difficult to hide a wizard from it behind your own troops. He also says, is it a crutch? Have you seen a non-flying dwarf king? Haha. Well, certain individuals I do see in a non-flying capacity. It depends what kind of mounts they can take as well. For example, a Goblin King, if you mount it on a flea bag, it's just as fast as flying and it's still nimble. So it's going to be cheaper than giving it the wings of Honey Maze. And again, to use the Goblin King as an example, putting auras on some of these individuals makes them less likely to take wings as well, because you're going to want to stick around with all your troops. So for example, the Goblin King can take the Headstrong aura. Then we had a question from Raccoon, who says, why is Basuzan different from Bracky? Are they chaff, lone rangers, or support? Should they be character war machine hunters, and can they survive after taking out one target? So, people who've watched all my battle reports will know that I use Susan and Bracky quite frequently as a combo. Bracky is very, very useful for just leading the line, with very inspiring and dread and all the other billions of special rules he's got piled upon him. Susan is more of a harasser. She doesn't have that same kind of synergy with the rest of the battle line, but both of them have good defense and good nerve. Their nerve is equivalent to, for example, a cavalry regiment. So unless you're hitting something ridiculously dangerous, the chances are they can survive a countercharge. So I'd put them in the higher bracket of flying individuals. There are certain other ones that have much lower nerve that you definitely wouldn't want to just throw into a hard-hitting unit unless you're doing it purely to hold them up for a turn. Bracky and Susan don't typically want to be war machine hunting because there's a lot of points tied up chasing after cheap units usually, unless your opponent's got some really expensive war machines, or they've just left one open in a spot where there won't be any consequences for killing it and the rest of the battle hasn't really begun yet because they haven't advanced too far. So if Susan can be up there just killing a rock lobber or something and then turn round in time for the battle to start, then that would be fine. But you don't want to be chasing down war machines while your other units are smashing into the enemy lines, because you want these expensive characters adding their attacks in there. So some key points: make sure there are consequences for wherever this flying individual wants to land. Make sure you're discouraging them from landing in any places that would be really annoying to you. Make sure you minimise the chances of them joining in with a charge, so for example staying out of range of a different unit that might want to charge you at the same time as the flying individual. Go after them with units that won't be bamboozled by their positioning or their speed, like war trombones for instance, or wizards, lightning bolting them. Don't let them dictate your army's movement, especially individuals. Other flying creatures, the really big ones that if they get into the flank they can just destroy things, then yes, sometimes you do have to take that into account when moving. Flying individual, less so. It's not going to take out most of your units on its own, so don't worry about exposing flanks to it. However, be wary of the multi-charges that it could be joining in with. Here's another top tip for you as well. If you've put a massive flyer down on the table and I've put Susan down on that side of the table on her own, then all she's really there to do is to attempt to act as a deterrent from you moving forward to threaten the flank of my army. She probably doesn't want to fight something that enormous with way more attacks than her, but she's hoping that she'll just cause the delay in your probably more expensive big flying monster getting to the rest of my army. So make sure that you don't overestimate them at the same time as not underestimating them. Difficult balance to strike, but once you've faced them enough, you should have a good grasp of exactly how big a threat they are. So you treat them with respect, but not fear. And I think that's the most important lesson for flying individuals. Respect them, do not fear them. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this episode. Feel free to drop any comments if you think there's anything I missed in my analysis here. I'm sure it's not the most comprehensive guide it possibly could be, so feel free, chime in and I shall respond and give you my thoughts. Let me know which flying individuals terrify you when you see them on the table. Let me know if you don't fear them at all. One I used to like actually was a vampire on a horse with the wings of Honey Maze back in the day. So you'd get the extra height so you could see over units to charge at things. Anyway, don't forget to like the video, subscribe and all that good stuff. Don't forget to check out all the links in the description. Maybe even consider pledging on the Patreon for more spicy, red hot, sizzling, dishlicious, tingling content. They've got a tournament this weekend, so you can expect the Kings of War tournament report probably on Monday. It's a 2-dayer, and I'm taking the Abyssal Dwarves. Is Susan going to be in the list? We shall see. All that remains to be said now is, good night out there, whatever you are.